The late morning sun spilled over the farmer's market in streaks of gold, warming the buzzing maze of canvas tents and cluttered fruit stands. The air was thick with the scent of ripening peaches and sizzling kettle corn, with bursts of laughter weaving through the chatter of shoppers. It was a scene that felt cheerful at first glance. Children tugged on sleeves, bartering moms haggled for fresher deals, and vendors chatted over one another with practiced charm. But beneath the noise and color, there was a sharp edge. An undercurrent of impatience hung in the air. Invisible, but electric, Grandma Edie moved slowly along the narrow aisle between stalls, her cane tapping a quiet, steady rhythm against the uneven pavement. Her silver curls peeked beneath a sun hat that had seen brighter seasons, and a small wicker basket trembled lightly on her arm. Each step seemed deliberate, not from hesitation, but from necessity. She paused at a table stacked with apples, leaning in, inspecting them with the careful attention of someone who understood the difference between ripe and overripe with just a touch. Behind her, the line grew. Not long, 2, maybe 3 people, but in this place, time was currency, and Edie was overdrawn. For crying out loud, a woman muttered behind her, adjusting her designer sunglasses with an annoyed flick. A vendor, a lanky man in his 40s with a name tag that read Chad, rolled his eyes dramatically, loud enough to be heard. "Lady, it's apples, not diamonds. Pick one and move." A few giggles sputtered from behind. Edie looked up, startled, then quickly back at the apples, her hand hovering in indecision. Her lips tightened. She wasn't slow to be difficult. She was slow because her knees didn't bend like they used to, and her fingers sometimes trembled. Chad leaned on the table, raising his voice. "What, you want to taste them all first? Or maybe we should just call your nurse." Snickers broke out now, louder. Someone from behind threw in, "Want help, Granny?" Not with kindness, but with a mocking tilt that turned the word into a blade. Edie's spine stiffened. Her knuckles whitened on the cane's handle, but she said nothing. There was nowhere to hide. Around her, the market didn't slow. It just swallowed the moment, moved past her like she was a rock in a river. An obstacle, a plum tumbled from her basket and hit the ground. No one bent to help Dot, and then, quietly, barely noticed, a little girl near the edge of the stall stepped closer. Maybe 7 years old. Skinny arms, wide brown eyes that watched with the stillness of someone seeing too much too soon. She gripped her mother's hand, but held a phone in the other. Camera turned on, pointed toward the scene. The mother was talking to a vendor, unaware. The little girl said nothing, just watched, just filmed Dot and Grandma Edie. She didn't see the girl. She didn't see the lens. But somewhere between her heart and the bruised apples she now abandoned, something inside her began to shrink, the way dignity does. When no one steps in, the morning sunlight filtered through lace curtains, casting delicate shadows across the kitchen table where a mason jar sat half full of coins, pennies, nickels, and the occasional quarter sparkled like tiny treasures beneath the glass. Edie sat at the table in her pale blue robe, her gnarled fingers sorting through the jar with the same reverence she gave to prayer. She didn't rush. She never did. Each coin was examined, counted, and placed in a neat little envelope labeled market. It was a weekly ritual, not just about saving, but about preserving something of herself. At 78, Grandma Edie had long since learned to stretch a dollar further than most could imagine. Her house, a modest single story with creaky floors and shelves full of fading photographs, was both her sanctuary and her silence. The air always smelled faintly of cinnamon and lemon oil, a lingering perfume from decades of baking and scrubbing. The wallpaper was peeling in the hallway, and the water heater had been coughing for weeks, but she made do. Edie didn't complain, not to the neighbors, not to the cashier at the corner store, and certainly not to her children, who lived states away and called once a week. Like clockwork, she folded the envelope and slipped it into the basket by the door before turning to her next task, the pies. Saturday meant a peach, 1 apple, and a smaller strawberry tart from Mrs. Henderson, who could no longer chew the crust. Edie worked with methodical grace, rolling out the dough with hands that remembered her mother's movements, gentle but firm, with a kind of love that could only be taught by repetition. As the fruit bubbled on the stove, she hummed an old hymn under her breath. The kitchen warmed with scent and memory. Once the pies were in the oven, she sat by the window with a notepad and her favorite pen. Edie still wrote letters, real ones, folded, stamped, and mailed. She believed people needed something to hold, something that didn't vanish with a click. Today's letter was for her granddaughter, Abby. Just a little note about the garden, a picture of the bluebird that visited the feeder, and a gentle reminder to wear sunscreen. She ended it the same way she always did, with love too big to fit in an envelope. It was almost time to leave for the market. She pulled her clothes from the line, pressed and ready, and took a seat at her vanity, a small ritual of dabbing rosewater behind her ears, smoothing lotion over her withered hands. She studied herself in the mirror, the lines, the gray, the woman she still recognized even if others didn't. A brooch pinned to her blouse, her late husband's favorite, completed the look. He used to say she looked like spring, even in winter. Edie paused at the photograph beside the mirror. There he was, smiling in suspenders and a crooked tie, holding her hand at the market some 20 years ago. They had gone every Saturday, rain or shine. He carried the bags, told bad jokes to the vendors, and made sure she never felt rushed. After he passed, she kept going, not because it was easy, but because stopping felt like letting go. Her cane waited by the door. She gripped it firmly, tucked the coin envelope into her purse, and stepped outside, locking the door with two gentle clicks. The sun met her face, and for a moment, she closed her eyes, breathing it in. The street was quiet. The world had changed so much, but she walked on it just the same. Every step to the market was slower now. But in her mind, she still walked beside him, and she still believed in fresh fruit, handwritten notes, and the kind of grace that didn't ask to be noticed, even if no one seemed to see her anymore. The Saturday market sprawled across the town square like a burst of color, canvas tents rippling in the breeze, chalk signs advertising 2 for $5 deals, baskets overflowing with tomatoes, berries, and sweet corn. The sticky sweet scent of peaches lingered heavy in the air, mingling with the buttery crackle of kettle corn and the sharp tang of fresh herbs crushed underfoot. It was the kind of place that seemed, at first glance, to hum with life and charm. Children darted between stalls, with balloon strings wrapped around their wrists, their laughter echoing like songbirds. A musician near the fountain strummed a cheerful folk tune, his guitar case open for tips beside his worn boots. Families clutched canvas bags brimming with produce, chatting about weekend plans as they sampled juicy melon slices or sipped lavender lemonade. But under that festive sheen pulsed something less welcoming, a steady thrum of hurry, of distraction. Vendors barked out their specials like carnival callers, voices clashing as they jostled for attention. Fresh berries here, one shouted, nearly drowning out another's call for homegrown zucchini. The crowd moved in waves, pulling and pushing, eyes darting toward better prices, faster lines. It wasn't just busy, it was rushed. Efficiency masked as joy. For someone like Edie, the space felt less like a celebration and more like an obstacle course. The uneven cobblestones caught her cane more than once, forcing small, cautious steps. Her basket bumped against bodies that passed too close. Conversations swirled around her but never included her, like she was a ghost moving through the blur. She paused at the entrance, letting the current of people move past her like wind through trees. The sun warmed her face, but her shoulders tightened. The last time she had come, a vendor had sighed audibly when she asked if the apricots were local. Another had rolled his eyes when she fumbled with coins. But she had come anyway, not for sympathy, for the small joy of choosing her own fruit, of hearing the bustle around her, of remembering. Edie scanned the rows of stalls, squinting slightly. She knew where the apple manually sat up, the one who used to sneak her an extra Fuji for free. But he hadn't been there the past few weeks. Maybe retired, or replaced. She pressed forward into the market's flow, careful not to disturb. Around her, younger shoppers wove past in stylish sneakers and loud conversation, earbuds tucked in, dogs on leash sniffing at strawberries. One woman bumped her shoulder without apology, barely noticing. The music from the fountain skipped a beat. A child cried out in frustration nearby. Somewhere behind her, someone laughed too loudly. It all felt like a blur of sound and scent and motion, a world she had once been part of, now moving too fast to make room for her. Still, she adjusted her hat and walked on. She just wanted a few ripe apples, that was all. Edie stopped at a fruit stall, tucked beneath a sun-bleached orange canopy. The display was beautiful. Rows of plump pears stacked in neat pyramids, their green gold skins catching the light like tiny lanterns. She leaned in slightly, her eyes scanning the fruit. She always chose carefully, feeling for softness near the stem, avoiding bruises, trusting her fingertips more than her eyes. These pears weren't for show. They were for canning. Maybe a crumble, if her arthritis allowed it. She reached out and gently touched one, then another. Not quite soft enough. Her fingers moved to a third. Slower now. Behind the stall stood a young woman in her early 30s. Sunglasses perched high on her head. Her arms folded tight across her branded apron. She tapped a long, painted fingernail against the table. Her name tag read Kayla. You looking to buy, or us doing a fruit inspection today? Kayla asked, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Edie looked up, startled but polite. I'm sorry, dear. Just trying to find a ripe one. I don't mind the price, but these'll bruise if they're not soft enough by tomorrow. Kayla sighed loudly, turned to the man at the stall next to hers. She's back again? Last week it was the peaches. Now it's the pears. He chuckled. She ever actually buy anything? Or thus test the fruit like it's a science fair? A ripple of laughter. Edie's hand froze mid-reach. Her eyes flicked to the pears, then to her feet. I just want to? Ripe. If you have them, she said softly, her voice thin against the surrounding noise. Lady, they're all ripe. Kayla snapped, grabbing a pear and dropping them into a brown paper bag. Here, take these. Edie hesitated. I'm sorry, but could I feel them? Just to be sure. That did it? Kayla's head dropped back as she groaned. Again with the questions. The man at the next stall laughed louder now. Maybe you should order online, Grandma. Have 'em delivered. Less strain on the staff. A few more vendors caught wind and leaned over, tossing in their own jabs like scraps to a fire. Better yet, get a personal shopper. Or a seeing-eye dog. Hope she doesn't ask for change in pennies again. Edie blinked rapidly. She could feel her face heating, her hands trembling slightly. She opened her mouth to respond, but nothing came. Not a single word. Behind her, the crowd had slowed. Not stopped, not intervened, just slowed. Heads turned, brows furrowed, but no one stepped forward. No one said a thing. A teenage boy standing nearby snorted, crumpled a paper napkin in his hand, and tossed it low. It landed just inches from Edie's foot. His smirk spread like ink on wet paper. A little girl holding her mother's hand looked up, eyes wide. She tugged her mother's sleeve. Mom, why are they being mean to her? The mother pressed her lips together, gave her daughter's hand a quick squeeze, but said nothing. Edie turned slightly, blinking as if waking from a fog. She bent slowly to retrieve the paper, though it wasn't hers. Her knees ached with the effort, and the cane wobbled beneath her weight. Somewhere off to the left, quiet as a whisper, a small voice spoke again. I think she's nice. No one responded. Edie rose, steadied herself. Her gaze swept over the faces around her. Most had already turned away. The laughter had softened, replaced by the sound of fruit being bagged and money exchanging hands. The world had moved on, but just past the crowd, a little girl stood still, the same one who had asked the question. Her eyes locked on Edie. In her hand, she held a phone. The camera was pointed forward, recording. She didn't speak. She didn't move. She just watched. And in that small act, the world tilted. Not much, just enough to shift the air. Edie turned back to the vendor. I'll take them, she said, her voice steady, though her fingers curled tight around her cane. Kayla handed over the bag without another word. Coins clinked into the tin cash box. Not one vendor said thank you. Edie walked away slowly, pears in hand, but something behind her had changed. The girl was still filming, still watching. Sometimes justice doesn't begin with shouting. Sometimes it begins with silence. Edie found a bench tucked between two overflowing flower stalls. A small wooden seat painted green long ago, now chipped and faded from too many seasons. She lowered herself slowly, her cane clattering softly against the pavement as she sat. The brown paper bag rested in her lap, thin enough that the shape of the pears pressed through. Her hands trembled as she tried to open her coin purse, the clasp refusing to budge under her shaking fingers. The noise of the market carried on around her. Laughter, chatter, the clang of cash registers. But it all sounded muffled now, as though she were hearing it through glass. She took a shallow breath, then another. Her chest felt tight, like the air itself had turned heavy. Maybe, she whispered, her voice barely audible above the hum of the crowd. Maybe I shouldn't come anymore. Her eyes filled slowly, the tears gathering but refusing to fall. She stared down at her lap, at her gnarled hands that once kneaded dough, buttoned tiny shirts, and brushed her husband's hair when it turned white. They looked foreign to her now, tools worn down to their last purpose. Across from her, a mother laughed as she swung her child up in her arms, twirling once before setting the girl down with a kiss on the forehead. The sound was soft, pure. It pierced something deep inside Edie. She closed her eyes, and suddenly, it wasn't the market she saw. It was another Saturday. Years ago. Sunlight spilling between rows of fruit. Her husband beside her, whistling some off-key tune as he held her hand. He used to sneak her extra coins when she fretted about prices, telling her, "You deserve the good pears, sweetheart. Don't settle for the bruised ones." She could still hear his laugh, low and warm, the way he'd tap her on the nose and say, "And maybe, if they play our song later, we'll dance right here in the square." They had, once, right where she sat now, beneath the same awning that shaded her from the sun. He'd spun her slowly, the bag of fruit swinging from his wrist, people clapping around them. She could still feel the pressure of his palm on hers, the way the world had disappeared except for that single, joyful rhythm, but now the rhythm was gone. Her lips quivered as she whispered into the quiet, "I just wanted some pears." It wasn't about the fruit. It never was. It was about remembering, about holding onto something that made her feel alive. Human, seen. The laughter from the stall echoed faintly behind her. Sharp, careless, young. It stung in a way that words alone could not. Her shoulders trembled. She pressed her palms together, as if in prayer, but no words came. Just the hollow ache of being dismissed. A gust of wind blew through the market, rattling the paper bag in her lap. The pears shifted inside. One rolled slightly, tapping the side of the bag like a heartbeat. For the first time, Edie didn't know if she'd come back next week. Maybe it was time to stop trying to fit into a world that no longer slowed down for people like her. She lifted her gaze toward the sky, cloudless, mercilessly bright. Around her, no one noticed the woman on the bench. Shoppers brushed past, hands full, eyes forward. Her presence rippled the air no more than a shadow. The invisibility settled in fully now, not sudden, not shocking, just quiet and complete. And as Edie sat there, coins trembling in her palm, the sound of the market rose again, loud, indifferent, alive. Without her, that night, long after the market had emptied and the vendors had packed away their stalls, a video quietly found its way onto the internet. It was short, blurry, shaky in the way that only a child's unsteady hand could capture. No fancy editing, no background music, just a moment, raw and quiet. An old woman being mocked for asking about pears. The caption was simple. "Why are grown-ups so mean?" It was posted from a child's account, likely with the help of a parent, and it didn't try to explain anything. It didn't need to. The video spoke for itself. Edie's voice, soft and shaking, could be heard asking her question. The snickers, the eye rolls, the cruel jokes tossed around like confetti, her trembling hands, the paper napkin thrown toward her feet, and in the background, the silent onlookers, the ones who had seen and chosen to do nothing. Within an hour, the video had a few hundred views, then a few thousand. By midnight, it was flooding news feeds around the country. People didn't just watch it, they felt it. "I see my own grandma in her. She's someone's mother, someone's wife. How could they treat her like that? My Nana used to be like that. So proud, so careful. I wish I could hug her again." The comments flowed like rain. Messages of outrage, heartbreak, and disbelief. A few came from people who had been at the market, admitting they had seen, but hadn't spoken. One user wrote, "I was 3 stalls away. I heard it. I didn't say anything. I've never felt so ashamed." By morning, the video had crossed 1 million views. It was picked up by local news. A reporter played the clip during a morning segment, her voice faltering as she read the caption aloud. "Why are grown-ups so mean?" And then came the voiceover, recorded and sent in by the little girl who had posted the video. "She reminded me of my Nana," the girl said, her voice soft but sure. She looked scared. "I didn't know what to do. I just wish someone had helped her." The segment aired on every local station and quickly spread beyond. Social media exploded with hashtags. Hashtag stand up for Edie, #kindness is courage, #see the invisible. People began to recognize Edie from the video. Some knew her from church. Others remembered seeing her at the market over the years, always polite, always quiet. "I haven't spoken to her in years, but I remember her smile." One woman wrote, "She used to bring peach pies to the community bake sale." The market board was inundated with messages, phone calls, complaints, demands for action, but more than anger, there was love. Messages of warmth, of support, of people asking where they could find her. One bakery offered her a lifetime supply of fresh pears. A florist asked if she liked daisies. Letters began pouring into the news station, handwritten. Just like Edie's, the world that had walked past her was now turning toward her. And somewhere, just a few streets away, Edie sat in her quiet home, unaware that her quiet dignity had moved a million hearts, but that wouldn't last for long. The next morning, as the market began to stir to life once more, tents rising, fruit being stacked, a white news van pulled up beside the main entrance. Then another, and another. Reporters stepped out, clutching microphones and looking around. Cameras were lifted onto shoulders. It wasn't the fruit they had come to see. It was her, the woman who had been mocked, and had endured it without raising her voice. The little girl arrived too, holding her mother's hand again. This time, she wasn't just an observer. She was a spark, a witness, a voice. And for the first time in a long while, the market, that place of hurry and noise, began to slow down. Eyes looked around. People whispered. Because now, the world was watching. The market looked different that morning. Not in structure. The tents still stood. The fruit still gleamed beneath plastic misters, and the familiar smell of sweet corn filled the air. But in energy, people moved slower, more alert. Conversations were quieter. Eyes darted toward the stalls where the incident had taken place, where now the cameras stood mounted on tripods, red lights blinking. Reporters walked between vendors with quiet purpose. Microphones were clipped, not shoved. They weren't here to sell a story. They were here to witness one. Kayla stood behind her fruit stand, lips tight, arms crossed, sunglasses missing. Gone was the usual performative smile. Her apron hung limp, stained from rush setup. The crowd that had once passed with indifference now hovered nearby, murmuring. The reporter approached gently. Kayla, you've seen the footage. You've read the comments. Do you have anything to say to the woman in the video? Kayla hesitated. It was just a bad day. That's all. Everyone was rushing. I didn't mean anything personal. Another vendor, the man who had joked about online ordering, chimed in from the next stall. We were just teasing. It wasn't like we hurt her or anything. You ever work retail? You gotta laugh or you'll go crazy. The reporter raised an eyebrow. You think laughter justifies what we all saw? The vendor opened his mouth to reply, but paused. His eyes moved beyond the camera to where a small group of older women stood watching. One clutched a walker, another wore a hearing aid. None of them spoke. They didn't need to. Their presence was a mirror. And then, without warning, a third vendor, a young man in his 20s with nervous eyes, stepped forward. His voice cracked. I didn't know it would go that far, he said. I thought it was funny. But when I saw the video, her hands were shaking. She looked so small. Silence settled like dust. He wiped at his eyes quickly, but the camera didn't flinch. Neither did the truth. By noon, the market board issued a statement. Several vendors would be suspended pending review, and mandatory sensitivity training would begin immediately. But that wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. Inspired by the video and the wave of support, a group of local teens organized an event, Elder Respect Day, to be held at the market the following weekend. Flyers were passed out. A banner was strung between two tents. Honor those who came before us. A city councilwoman showed up with a bouquet and a donation check for Edie's church. The community, jolted awake, had found something they didn't know they'd lost. The need to protect the quiet among them. And then came the headline in the town paper. Edie, the grandma who broke the internet. Beneath it, a photo of her from years ago, beaming beside her husband at a pie contest. Someone had found it in the community archives, but Edie hadn't seen any of it yet. At home, she was folding laundry in the living room when there was a soft knock at the door. She opened it slowly, unsure, and found the little girl standing there, holding a bouquet of white daisies almost too big for her arms. Behind her stood her mother, eyes glassy with emotion. Hello, the girl said shyly. I'm the one who took the video. Edie's lips parted in surprise. She looked from the flowers to the child's open face, then to the mother, who stepped forward. I'm so sorry, we didn't do more in the moment, the woman said. But my daughter, she saw you. She really saw you. Edie blinked hard, the moment catching in her throat. I don't know what to say, she whispered. I didn't even know anyone noticed. We all did, the mother said gently. We just needed someone brave enough to remind us. Edie took the bouquet with trembling hands. The daisies smelled like spring. Behind them, in the street, a small group had gathered. Neighbors, parishioners, strangers. Some carried signs. Some just held each other. They hadn't come to protest. They'd come to celebrate. And for the first time in a long while, Edie didn't feel like a visitor in her own world. She felt held seen. The following Saturday, the market bloomed earlier than usual. Colorful bunting flapped gently in the breeze. A fresh banner stretched across the square. Elder Respect Day. Because dignity never ages, booths had decorated their corners with ribbons and hand-painted signs. A few even set out chairs for older guests. Something had shifted, not just in tone, but in heart. And then Edie arrived. She moved carefully, as always, but with a quiet confidence that hadn't been there the week before. Beside her rolled a little red wagon, lined with gingham cloth and stacked neatly with peach pies, their golden crusts still warm, the scent wafting ahead like a gentle herald. Each one had a simple handwritten label. For anyone who's ever felt invisible, the crowd noticed her almost immediately. People stepped aside, not out of pity, but with respect. Smiles bloomed like sunflowers. One woman clapped quietly. Another placed a hand over her heart. Walking beside Edie was the little girl in a yellow dress, her curls bouncing with every step. Pinned to her chest was a large, handmade button that read, "Kindness is brave." She held Edie's hand like it was the most natural thing in the world. Edie made her way from stall to stall, offering pies with a soft smile and a few heartfelt words. To the man who always helps his neighbor carry groceries. To the teacher who still writes notes to her students. To the mailman who whistles every morning. No speeches, no fanfare, just gesture after gesture. A quiet wave of grace. Then she reached Kayla's stall. Kayla looked different. Less guarded, less painted. She stood behind her fruit table, fidgeting with a small basket of pears, the ripest ones placed on top. For a moment, the two women simply looked at each other. Before Edie could speak, Kayla stepped out from behind the table, wiping her palms on her apron. "I saw the video a dozen times," she said quietly. "I still wince when I hear myself." She glanced down, then added, "You didn't deserve that." Edie offered her a pie. Kayla hesitated, then took it, almost reverently. "I don't know how to make it right," she said, "but, if it's okay, I'd like to help you carry your bags today." Edie's eyes softened. "You were just having a bad day," she said, her voice warm, even. "We all do, sometimes. What matters is what we do next." Kayla blinked quickly, her throat tight. She nodded and gently reached for the red wagon's handle. Together, they walked the market aisle. Edie, the little girl, and the vendor who had once made her feel small. And everywhere they passed, something bloomed in their wake. Not just smiles, but recognition. People seeing one another. Edie paused near the fountain and placed the last pie on a stone ledge with a folded note beside it. "For the next person who feels unseen, you matter." And as the wind lifted her curls and laughter rippled behind her, Edie stood in the heart of the market, no longer invisible, but unforgettable. The market bench where Edie had once sat, trembling and defeated, now bore a new brass plaque. Its edges gleamed in the sunlight, freshly polished, letters carved with care, reserved for those who walk slower and still show up. It wasn't just a seat anymore. It was a statement, a promise, a silent tribute to resilience. People passed it with reverence. Some slowed their steps. Others paused to read the inscription out loud to their children. A few even sat for a moment, whether they needed rest or just a reminder. That week, Edie's handwritten letter appeared in the editorial section of the local paper, tucked between articles about city ordinances and football scores, but impossible to miss. Titled simply, "To Those Who Rush Past," it was short but full of grace. Kindness isn't trendy. It's necessary. You don't need a camera to be a witness. Just eyes, just a heart. We all move through this world together. Let's try not to trample each other while we do. Edie Matthews' readers clipped it. Some pinned it to their refrigerators. One teacher read it aloud to her class. For the first time in a long while, the voice of an elder wasn't just heard. It was listened to. At the market, things continued, as markets do, with fruit and shouting and chatter. But now there was something softer layered into the sound. A vendor offered to carry an elderly man's bag without being asked. A teenager gave up his place in line for a woman holding a walker. People made eye contact, said thank you, laughed slower. Edie noticed. She didn't come to the market for attention anymore. She came for peaches, for stories, for life. And life, she found, had come back to meet her. That Saturday, she walked past the bench, still steadying herself with her cane, and paused just long enough to touch the plaque with the tip of her fingers. Her eyes lifted to the movement across the square. There, behind a stack of apricots, the little girl stood again. A new dress, the same button, Kindness is brave. She waved. Edie smiled. This time, she waved back. Would you have stood up for Edie? Or would you have watched in silence, like so many did that day? The world is full of moments that test our courage, not the loud, heroic kind, but the quiet bravery it takes to speak up, to notice, to care when no one else does. As the video fades, we see Edie's soft smile beneath her sun hat, her hand gently wrapped around the little girl's. They walk through the market together, not fast, but with purpose, not alone, but seen. Behind them, a breeze carries the scent of peaches and warm pie. Around them, kindness grows. If this story moved you, share it. Share it for the people who still feel invisible, for the elders who've paved the roads we walk, for the children who dare to see what adults too often ignore. Let's remind the world, kindness is contagious, compassion is powerful, and silence is a choice. What would you have done?